I don't know where you're coming from today, but I am in snowy Ottawa where it is cha-cha chilly. Of course, on the land of the Algonquin people, unceded territory, the Anishinaabe people. We appreciate you being here today. I want to know where you're coming from today. We have such a very an awesome topic today, but we have people coming from all over Canada and the odd time. I'm so excited. We get people from wherever in the world, which is great. We've had people from New Zealand and Europe and all over the place, which is great. So we want to know where you're coming from today. So jump in the chat. Let me know where you are coming from, and I want to know all about that. Of course, this is the Capacity Building Institute monthly webinar, and I love being here every single month with all of you. We have a very important topic today. Dwaine Taylor is going to join us in a little bit, so you'll want to hear from him. I'm going to give him a formal introduction a little bit later, and then I want you all to sit back, your favorite beverage, maybe it's a coffee, tea, and then obviously participate as well. Not only get to listen to Dwaine and hear his great expertise, but we want to hear from you. I get to ask questions, but so do you. So that makes today really fun. Speaking of fun, my friend Addie. Hi, Addie. How are you?
Hi.
There she is. She's going to give you a recap of everything CBI does, and take it away, Addie.
Perfect. Can you see my screen?
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay, awesome. Hello, everyone. My name's Addie, or DT, and I'm the Outreach and Engagement Coordinator at Capacity Building Institute. If you don't know about CBI yet, we're a nonprofit organization under the umbrella of Sustainable Capacity Solutions that provides training, coaching, mentorship, and support to staff and volunteers in the nonprofit environmental sector across Canada. So a little bit more about us. So our mission is to provide equal opportunity and access to capacity building training for every small shop nonprofit environmental leaders across Canada. And we do this through our 6 core themes, which include financial management, fund development, governance and board development, volunteer engagement and human resources, communications and outreach, risk management, legal issues, and leadership on organizational culture. So these 6 themes are present throughout the number of different programs that we offer. Just waiting for the slide to go. So currently we offer a few different programs, including the Capacity Building webinar series, which is where you are today. And then we have our flagship program, which is the Capacity Building Certificate Program that just concluded last month. So congratulations for all the graduates. And then we also have our Youth Intern Training Program. So this program is for youth between ages 18 to 30, and it's perfect for early career professionals who are looking to get into the sector and learn more about it. So our winter training program applications, the deadline's coming up fast. We still have our registration open for Ontario, Atlantic, and Northern employers. So if you would like volunteers or interns to help build your capacity in the upcoming year, make sure you register. You can register using a QR code right there. So I, myself, am currently partaking in this program right now. So I've loved being here, and it's been a great experience. And if you're a nonprofit who would benefit from having a youth, this is a really great opportunity, not only bridge the gap between your capacity, but also gives youth like myself an opportunity to gain experience in the sector. So yeah. Now we have a number of really great coaches that are part of our program, including Sam, who's hosting our webinar today. We also have Rob, who has over 10 years of experience in the sector, Barb King, who has over 20 years of extensive management experience in the nonprofit sector, Alex Keegan, who has been helping nonprofits across Canada with communication strategies, and you can hear from her in an upcoming webinar. And Dwaine Taylor, who's also helped over us nonprofits for over a decade and will be speaking to you today. And I also want to take this time to thank our funders and supporters. We run a lot of different programs and support over 150 different organizations across Canada. And that simply just wouldn't be possible without all of our funders and supporters. So big thank you for allowing us to deliver programs like this webinar. And before we get back into today's webinar, I just want to give you guys our contact information. If you want to get in touch or have any questions, you can email us. There should be more information on our website, or you can give us a call. Also, we have some really exciting webinars coming up, including a financial statement for the board's webinar on February 18th. So make sure to sign up for our monthly newsletter that has reminders for all of our events and other community events. And that's all from me.
Beautiful as always, Addie. Thank you so much. It is an honor to introduce our guest for this month, and I'm so excited to take a deep dive into diverse volunteer engagement and recruitment with the one and only Dwaine Taylor. Dwaine is the founder of NewPact, a social impact collective that provides affordable and accessible advice and training to charities, nonprofits, startups, and small businesses. For over a decade, I'm going to ask him about that in a minute, Dwaine has helped organizations build community engagements, strategies, establish employee support programs, and implement equity, diversity, and inclusion policies. He has done incredible work all across the country, and that is including workshops for the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. He's published policy papers for the Association of Fundraising Professionals and designed programs for Carleton University. What an honor. Hello, my friend. How are you, Dwaine?
I'm good, Sam. How are you? Can you hear and see me okay?
I can see you, I can hear you, and I cannot wait for this next hour to take a deep dive in and talk about all of this important information. We've got lots of people joining us from all across the country, and I'm so excited for them to hear you today. So I want to take a little pause because I want to talk about this 10-year mark. And the reason I want to is because I want to ask you, I want to start off with a really important question. Have we made any strides in the last 10 years when it comes to DEI?
Wow, that's a big question, Sam. Putting me on the spot. First off, welcome, folks. Pleasure to meet all of you. I see some of you are still trickling in. Really lovely to share the space and time with you all. I'm also located in snowy Ottawa, the traditional and unceded territories of the Anishinaabe and Algonquin peoples. Have we made any progress in DEI in the past 10 years? Well, I think the answer to that is self-explanatory, because what we're seeing right now in a lot of the political discourse is a pushback against this concept of equity, diversity, and inclusion. We're going to hopefully get to dig into that a little bit today, why that's even happening, and how it applies to charities and nonprofits. A lot of it is kind of rooted in misunderstanding. But throughout my life, what I've learned, and I think most people will learn this, is things don't usually get pushback unless they're gaining traction, right? It tends to be the sort of natural response to things that people are uncomfortable with, unfamiliar with, new and emerging. I don't think we're at a point where we've kind of hit saturation in equity, diversity, inclusion, where all of our problems are solved and we're in this utopian world or anything along those lines. But I do see that in the past 10 years, there's been such a growth and traction in this space, particularly this focus on intentionality behind the diversity that exists in our communities already, behind how we make our spaces more inclusive, behind how we engage folks in really meaningful and authentic ways, that folks who either don't understand what that actually means in practice, have sort of politicized or misconstrued views of what that means in a day-to-day interaction, or folks who are unfortunately have nefarious, intentions, have kind of mobilized to push against it. And I think that is the biggest indication of anything, that the issues that we push forward, the issues that we drive, if they're not getting traction, people don't care about them. They don't push against them. And the pushback we're seeing suggests that there has been success and growth in the equity, diversity, and inclusion space.
So that statement hit me so hard, I typed it out in the chat. Because I wanted everybody to see that. So issues do not get pushed back unless they're gaining traction. I attributed it to you. Don't you worry. It's all you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
But I think it's a really good point because, and the reason I was thinking about this, obviously, and I can't believe it's only been a week, but there's been a lot of discord in obviously south of us, but it does impact us here in Canada. So I do want to take a deep dive in and talk about what are the reasons. That's one of them. You're the expert. I want to hear from you, but that's been on my mind.
Yeah, that's a really great question. Um, you know, without overcomplicating things and like diving just into the unique experiment that is the United States of America, and how that is similar but also different to Canada, because that discourse that you're referring to, Sam, we're seeing a lot of that discourse in Canada as well, actually. One of our federal candidates, presumptive potential prime minister in the future, has very similar discourse around equity, diversity, and inclusion. And there seems to be that it has become this whistle, this sort of chanting call against things that are inherently progressive. But when you actually think about what equity, diversity, and inclusion are at their foundation, when you strip away the politics, when you strip away the posturing, when you strip away all these components, you actually realize that it's all very human. And that if we all recognize and understand that, then fundamentally there's nothing really to push against. And so the way I always like to talk about it, and I think we've talked about this before, we've had this conversation, is the dinner party, right? You're gonna host a dinner party. Let's imagine, all of you on the call, let's imagine you are hosting a dinner party. It's one of the most universal experiences. Doesn't matter what culture you are from around the world, where you've been. Sharing food is like a universal thing. People host folks and share food. So you're hosting a dinner party. And when you're hosting that dinner party, there's a few things you would think about naturally, right? You think about when you want to host it. You're going to pick a time that's the most accessible to most folks, where you're going to host it, a space that's accessible to you, but also that people can get to. You're going to think about things like the menu and the food that you offer. Do people have dietary restrictions, right? You're going to think about the composition of the people in the room. Who do you actually want in that space? And the folks in that space, how are they going to interact with each other? How are they going to feel that this is a dinner party that everybody can enjoy? If you actually apply the principles of a dinner party to an organization, you're actually applying equity, diversity, inclusion. Because all equity, diversity, and inclusion is those same questions we just framed around a dinner party. Equity is about who has access, right? When you frame questions of equity, what you're actually asking yourself and your organization is, who has access to this dinner party? Who has access to volunteer at our organization? Who has access to our organization services? If you realize there's only one very small subsection of the population who has access, then fundamentally your programs, your services are inequitable, right? If you're designing these programs to cater to the wide audience, but you only see one group showing up, there's a reason for that, right? That absence of equity is what results in an absence of diversity. The example I give is, if I was hosting a dinner party, for context, I'm of Jamaican heritage. So if I was hosting a dinner party and I was serving the spiciest jerk chicken that anyone has ever eaten in their entire life, I'm like, I'm going to have a great time, but not everyone else is going to have a great time. And the folks who I'm going to invite to my party are going to be folks who like spicy food. They're going to be like, great, I like spicy food. So if we look at spicy food as an aspect of diversity, right? You would say that, well, you're not going to have a diverse group because not everyone that eats spicy, only people who eat spicy food will show up. Other folks aren't going to show up. So you end up with an absence of diversity because I didn't think about designing my experience in a way that invites folks to partake in that, right? And then the same thing happens with inclusion. Yes, I might invite folks to participate and they enjoy spicy food, and that's really great. But what if one of them is vegan or vegetarian, and I'm only serving chicken, right? You can make spicy vegan and vegetarian food, but if that person comes to my party, are they going to feel included in that space? The answer is obviously no. They're going to feel left out, isolated. They're coming to a dinner party and they can't eat, right? So when you think about these in a very human way, you actually realize equity, diversity, inclusion isn't something to be politicized. It's only being politicized for people's personal misunderstanding of these topics and concepts, or for political purposes as well. So it's really quite straightforward. And unfortunately, the social sector, charities, nonprofits, folks like the folks on this webinar, you're going to be facing this overwhelmingly in the next few years. because the political discourse has ramped up so significantly. And fundamentally, the work you do is so critical, and fun has to include equity, diversity, and inclusion.
Absolutely. And when I look at, the work that you've done, the word accessible comes out to me a lot, because even accessing programs like this, there's a lot of charities that are having, for instance, just to give an example, their professional development budget cut, or they're having acquisition cut, or they're having something cut. And so I think a big part of your work would be making sure that this type of training is available for people, because we want everybody to have the opportunity to be trained, and to open up their minds, right, to the opportunity.
Yeah. 100%, Sam. And that's actually funny enough. That's how this work started for me.
Oh,
About 4 years ago, I was doing a lot of this work within institutions, within organizations. I was leading equity initiatives at Carleton University. Before that, I was working at We Charity, leading some leadership and equity programming. I was doing some work with Canadian Race Relations Foundation. And I realized there was this gap where there was these organizations who had resources and had the capacity to invest in training and knowledge about these topics and concepts, and others. And then there's organizations who didn't really have that capacity and were seeking out networks for learning and professional development. And that's why I love doing work with Capacity Building Institute, because you make this stuff super accessible to folks, which is phenomenal. It allows them to understand and get a foundational knowledge of these concepts that they can then take back to their organizations. And then if they want to go deeper, they can reach out to any of the trainers for additional supports, right? So it's so critical, because the absence of knowledge is what results in a lot of the political discourse that we see right now. It's this, they say that knowledge is power. And a lot of people really are only engaging with these topics at a surface level, and not really going to the depths of how it applies to their organization, which is why I'm really excited to talk about volunteers specifically, and like diversity and volunteer recruitment, and how that applies into what everyday small charity nonprofit in Canada.
for sure. And I definitely want to get to that. One thing I want to talk about before we get to that, because I want to set a bit of a foundation, is in some areas, whether that be proximity, location, community, whatever it is, community is built naturally. So it's just natural. A lot of people have the same interests, that type of thing. But building community is a whole other thing. Because I think a lot of people, and I'll use the pandemic, and I hate doing it, but I'll use the pandemic as a moment where we realized who had community and who didn't. And it came to the surface, like, I think the pandemic was declared on the 13th of March, but that came to the surface in 30 days, who had community and who didn't, even sooner in some communities. So talk to me a little bit about what you mean about building community and the strategies to do that, because although it happens naturally sometimes, a lot of the times it takes that foundational work.
Absolutely. That's a really powerful question. And as much as we don't like to, live in the past of the pandemic, I feel like we all have like this underlying trauma when we think about COVID-19. It is, I think, a really powerful example. What we saw during the pandemic is actually an exasperation of what we see within a lot of our social structures right now. The people who didn't have access to resources had less access to resources. The people who couldn't afford to self-isolate were the ones who got the most sick, were the ones who experienced the greatest physical harm and unfortunate death rates as a result of the pandemic as well. And I think that's a really powerful reflection for all of us to really look at that example and then apply it to our work when we're talking about building communities, right? A lot of times this concept of the default is what really draws us away from interrogating how we can do our work more meaningfully and better. And that's the default is the community that's built versus building community, right? You give a great example, right? When we're thinking about diversity in communities, there's a lot of studies and research that show that people who grew up in multicultural, multi-ethnic environments are more susceptible to being having positive relationships with people of different genders, races, religions, ethnicities, and so forth, right? I grew up in Brampton, Ontario, just outside of Toronto. Toronto is literally the most diverse city on the planet on the planet, right? And so for me, exposure to difference was normal, right? This idea that, well, everyone's different. Everyone has different cultures. Everyone dresses different. Everyone has different religions, different culture. So it was a natural progression for me to say, okay, like this is just the way the world is, right? That is the way that community happened naturally in that environment. But that's an anomaly, right? In a lot of Canada, that's not the case, right? Community doesn't look that way in a lot of different parts of Canada. And that's really important for us to acknowledge and to recognize. So as a result, for those folks who are doing programs and doing services providing services in different areas across the country, there's the default, which is what's there, and then there's the things you have to be really intentional about, right? If you do a call out in, let's say, Perth, Ontario, I use Perth, Ontario as a great example because I spent a lot of time out in Perth working with rural charities and nonprofits there, and in the Lanark County region. Perth, Ontario historically has not been a very ethnically diverse community, right? We're starting to see a little bit of shift in that. Just like a lot of rural communities, you see a lot of homogeneousness, a lot of people, similar cultures, similar backgrounds, similar religions, etc. And that shift is starting to slowly happen in that community. So if you're doing a volunteer call out in Perth, Ontario, you're likely to get a very specific archetype of volunteer. You're likely to get a volunteer who is retired, who is white Canadian, and someone who probably has been grown up or lived in the area for a significant period of time, because those are the folks who have the money, time, and resources to be able to volunteer in that particular community. If you were to do that same call out in downtown Toronto, you get a fundamentally different group of people. And what matters is how you reach those different audiences, and if it's necessary for your organization. Maybe for your organization, you don't need to actually focus on ethnic or racial diversity in your volunteers. I would actually argue that most organizations should, but depending on the work you're doing, that might not be critical in the moment. But there will be aspects of diversity you do have to think about. If you're a youth charity, but all your volunteers are retirees, are the youth going to see themselves in the volunteers that you're leveraging, right? That's not going to be the case. So if you're working as a youth charity in Perth, Ontario, how do you get younger volunteers, right? And that's where questions like equity, diversity, inclusion come into play. Because if you apply that framework, and I have some graphics and stuff we can talk through and walk through today, you'll actually see that it's actually really beneficial for organizations to apply these frameworks. It'll actually produce the outcomes that you're looking for.
Okay, let's take a deep dive in there. Let's see some of that, Dwaine, because I think that would be really powerful. I don't know if you need a minute to get some stuff pulled up, but I think it would be really powerful to be able to share that.
Yeah, of course.
Let's take it from here. Yeah, for sure.
Well, I mean, just super high level. And I like to use this as a thought experiment because people love tangible examples. So I'm hoping the folks that are listening on the webinar, you're loving tangible examples. So as Sam and I were discussing, we talked about this concept of equity, diversity, and inclusion. Equity being about who has access, diversity being who's in the room, and inclusion being is really who's having a good time, right? So that dinner party analogy that we mentioned earlier. Now, if we go a step further and we look at how this actually applies to any organization, whether it's a charity, a nonprofit, Walmart, like, doesn't really matter the organization. Usually equity, diversity, and inclusion also reflects as in policy, people, and the environment, right? Equity is a policy question. These are sort of the things that you do operationally at your organization that determines how things move forward, what policies you establish, how you recruit volunteers is a great example of that. Diversity is just the composition of the people on your teams or in your volunteer groups. That's usually a result of policy. The policies that you establish as an organization, the frameworks you put in place, ultimately will determine the diversity of your staff and your people, which is really, really important to recognize. And that diversity then is impacted by the environment you create. One of the greatest challenges that organizations have, and this is why I think in the webinar we talked about recruitment and retention, right, is in anyone who's worked in HR ever or in volunteer work ever will tell you that, there's two sides to the coin. There's getting your people and there's getting them to stay. Right. Even if you have great policy, even if that policy results in super diverse volunteers or super diverse staff, getting them to stay is a matter of inclusion. It's about the environment that you create for them. Otherwise, you just have a revolving door, right? Which is why you can't do equity, diversity, or inclusion in isolation. You could have a super great culture, but if that culture isn't inclusive of diverse perspectives and voices, then it's actually just a homogeneous culture. You're going to end up with the same types of volunteers. If you have a really great policy, that's really awesome. And that might result in some super diverse staff or volunteers joining your organization, but they're not going to stay if your culture struggles. So you have to look at these as an equation, all kind of fitting together as one big puzzle. Some questions you could ask yourself as an example when you're thinking about this concept of equity, diversity, inclusion is who can volunteer at your organization? That's an equity question. What are the policy barriers that prevent certain types of folks from volunteering with your organization? A really great example of this is so many organizations ask for police record checks as a standard framework to be able to volunteer at an organization. Police record checks are great when you're working with vulnerable populations and you really want to make sure that the people that you're leveraging for volunteer capacities are safe folks that you can put in these with those vulnerable groups. But when you're thinking about who would not pass a police record check, there's a lot of folks in this country that won't pass a police record check and might be great volunteers. A great example of this would be someone who has maybe struggled with the law due to addiction in their past and has since been clean for 20 years, 30 years, and is now advocating for addiction supports. That person might want to volunteer for an addiction house or an addiction service provider in the charitable sector, but they might not be able to if that charity says you need a PRC. Really ironic when you think about it, right? Because that person is actually probably the best example of someone you'd want as a volunteer. They've navigated addiction for themselves. They've come clean. They're now looking to give back to the community. But if your policy says you need a police record check, suddenly that person is no longer on the table. And that limits your diversity. And that becomes your question of who are your volunteers? When you actually look at your volunteer base, who are they comprised of? Do you see people of a similar socioeconomic background? Do you see people of different cultures, races, etc.? If you don't, the question is why? What are those barriers that are stopping them from being that diverse? And then the last piece, of course, how do your volunteers shape your environment? The inclusion piece. How do you treat your volunteers? Are your volunteers an extension of your staff and your team? Do they feel included? Do they feel like they're a part of the organization? Or are your volunteers just there, one day a week for 3 hours, cleaning up the trash and no one talks to them or engages them? How is that going to create a culture of retention for those folks? And I'll give you this really quick example, and then we can jump back into the conversation, Sam, because I think this example is a really great case study. So I'll use this case. I know a lot of you folks work in the environmental sector, and I was thinking of an environmental case, but I found this one to be a little bit more poignant because it's really easy to understand. So the case is a youth mental health charity. So this charity this is based on a real story, based on a real organization, okay? This charity provides mental health supports to youth refugees, so young refugees coming to Canada. And they run after-school workshops at different local schools each week, right? That's the purpose of this organization. This is what they do. And we're going to go through 3 archetypes of volunteers. These aren't real people, but they're actually archetypes of real volunteers. So this is Liz, right? Liz is a cisgendered, straight, middle-class, white woman born in Canada, 2-parent household. Liz has university-age kids, so they're not home. They're out doing their thing. And Liz is a certified mental health counselor, okay? This is Liz. Liz's profile. Then we have Avery. Avery is a gay, middle-class Black man who immigrated to Canada. So he wasn't born here, but he immigrated here as a youth. He plays a caretaker role for his parents, and he struggled with mental health issues in his youth and has a juvenile misdemeanor record as a result of that. Okay, so this is Avery's profile. And then we have Mira, who is cisgendered, straight. She's a lower middle-class brown woman. Mira works 2 jobs on weekdays, and she also volunteers on weekends. So she's very, very busy. And Mira is actually a former refugee. Okay. When you look at Mira, when you look at Avery, and when you look at Liz, I'm super curious, and you can just throw your answers in the chat. Who do you think is the most likely person to be able to volunteer for this youth mental health charity? So I'm curious what people say in the chat. So you have Liz, Avery, and Mira. Okay, so we're going to go through it quickly again. Who do you think is most likely? You can just throw your answers in the chat. You can just say Liz, you can say Mira, you can say Avery, whatever you think. People say Mira. Sam says Mira. Mira probably because Mira's a former refugee. Who else? Who else do we think? Anybody? Addie says Liz. Agnes says they all look great to volunteer for me. Okay. All right, Liz. A couple people say Liz. All right, Liz. Okay, Liz sounds great. Why Liz? Why does Liz sound great? Well, certified mental health counselor has great qualifications, right? Absolutely. This is great reflections to think about. What I'd like you to actually look at is, the question of who's most likely to have time to volunteer with the organization. So we talked about Liz being great. Liz can be an awesome fit for the organization, but who's actually most likely to have time? Is it still Liz? Probably. She has university-age kids. She's not really taking care of anybody. Avery, on the other hand, caretaker for his parents. Mira works 2 jobs on weekdays and volunteers on weekends. So Liz definitely has the time. But who's most likely to be able to relate personally to the youth in the program? Is that Liz? Liz isn't a former refugee. Mira's the former refugee, right? Liz has the time, but Mira can relate personally to these kids. Avery also is a great option because Avery struggled with mental health in his youth. Also a great option to be able to relate to youth in the program. And then the third question is, if all of your volunteers look or had similar experiences to your most likely candidate, how might that impact the environment? If every single volunteer looked like Liz, or if every single volunteer looked like Avery, or if every single volunteer looked like Mira, how would that change how your program is run and operated? These are the sorts of questions you would be asking yourself when you're thinking about diverse volunteer recruitment and retention. Now, in this particular case study, this is the kind of how it falls in place in equity, diversity, inclusion. Avery won't pass a police record check because of his youth misdemeanor record. So Avery's not even on the table if one of your policies as an organization is police record checks. Avery's not there. Despite how awesome he might be able to relate to the youth, having struggled with mental health himself, if you say you need a PRC to volunteer for organization, that's an equity barrier. Avery can no longer participate. Another thing that's really important is Mira, who is our former refugee, can't actually get a police record check. Police record checks are localized tools that we use in Canada. Folks who are refugees go through far more rigorous background screening through CSIS and the RCMP when they come to Canada, but they can't get a local police record check from the city of Ottawa because they haven't been a resident in Ottawa long enough to be able to do that, right? So that means that both Avery and Mira would be completely eliminated from the equation simply because they cannot get a PRC if a PRC is a requirement to volunteer for your organization. That's an equity barrier. Really interesting because those folks might be great volunteers, right? Another really great example to think about is time, right? The way in which the program is run, I shared that it is run as after-school programs. Avery and Mira both have limited availability. So if your program's only run after school, Avery won't be able to participate. He has caretaking responsibilities for his parents. And Mira won't be able to participate because she works 2 jobs, right, on the weekdays. That would mean that your only viable option for a volunteer is Liz. But remember that question I asked earlier. Number 3, if all of your volunteers looked like or had similar experiences to your most likely candidate, how would that impact your environment? If every single volunteer looked like or had similar experience to Liz, and you're a youth mental health charity specifically for refugees, how might that impact your environment? It's a pretty big question to reflect on. So I'll leave this chart up here, but happy to have a deeper conversation about this, Sam.
Yeah, no, it's such a good exercise because I'm, even my thought process working through that, I've never seen that before. And I think about, a number of charities that I worked at where we would be serving a racialized population, and all of us, because I worked there as well, all of us were white, right? What message does that send to the kids as well? Do you ever think about that side of it?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a ton of research that shows that representation is one of the greatest things you can do for vulnerable populations. People need to see themselves in others. And we see this all the time when we talk about this in the context of women in leadership. It's unquestioned, right? We know that when a young girl sees a woman in leadership, they are more likely to see themselves as leaders. In every research study across the planet, in every country, that is affirmed. And it's the same actually with racialized community and marginalized communities, right? Young Black men, young Black boys are more likely to follow the careers and role models of older Black men. It's the same thing when you actually look at folks outside of their race or their gender, but even if you look at their lived experience, right? If someone struggling with addiction is getting support from someone who has overcome addiction, then they are more likely to be successful in their journey than getting support from someone who has never struggled with addiction throughout their entire life. Representation is super critical in almost every facet that you can think of. So when we're thinking of volunteers, if our volunteers look nothing like the folks we're serving, that can have a really massive impact, because what it suggests is that there's a power dynamic at play. It becomes a bit of that notion that people speak of sometimes, called the savior complex, where it might not be that anyone in this space feels that way. They might not be like, I'm a savior, I'm a good person, I'm here to help, and these people are, abject and they need my help. That might not be what's inside people's heads, but that is what's in the environment, right? And that can simply just be from having one group of people look one way and another group of people look another, and no cross-pollination of identity or representation in that space.
Because we do some truth bombs here once a month. So here's my truth bomb.
Yeah.
I was a bit nervous to use that term, that savior syndrome term, because it's just been, it's a hard term sometimes to hear, and I remember someone saying that, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's not what I was trying to do. I was just trying to help. So it's got these connotations to it, right?
It does. It does. And what's really interesting about that, Sam, is that you shared, you're scared to use it. What's really fascinating is that when we're talking about these topics of equity, diversity, inclusion, people tend to feel them very personally, right? It's very core to their identity, which is why they're kind of awkward to talk about, which is why probably some of the people on the call, you have like a bit of a knot in your stomach. You're kind of like it's a little uncomfortable, because it feels like a conversation about you as an individual, right? It's about your values as opposed to the operations and the structures of your organization. I want to really emphasize, we're not actually talking at any point here about people's values, right? We're not talking about, are people good people or bad people, right? We're working off the assumption everyone's a good person, right? We're working off the assumption you work in the charitable and social sector, you're probably a good person, because you literally could be probably making way more money working for a big company, right? So
man.
Right?
Yeah.
Like we're working off the assumption everyone's a good person. When we're talking about equity, diversity, inclusion in the context of organizations, what we're talking about is, how do you apply those principles of goodness, right? It's not simply enough to say, well, I'm a good person, therefore the work I do is good, right? That is actually a logic leap, right? To say, well, everyone here is a good-hearted person. We all care about the environment. We all care about the communities. So we're all the work we do is inherently good. That's not necessarily the case, right? Chemists make mistakes all the time and create bombs, right? These things can happen with the charitable sector as well. So to take it a step back, yes, the savior syndrome piece might feel personal. It might be like, ooh, but I don't see myself that way. You absolutely might not see yourself that way. You might not be even exuding any of that externally. But if you're in an environment where everybody who is in a position of power looks like you, and everyone that you're serving or supporting doesn't look like you, it will automatically create that power dynamic, whether you want it to or not. And that's why having diversity in these spaces is so critical.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you for chatting about that. I've got maybe about 5-6 minutes left to answer Dwaine questions, or Dwaine to ask Dwaine questions. Then we are turning it to all of you. So we're looking for your questions. We have a couple in the chat already, so thank you for that. but certainly pop your questions in there and we'll be able to get to those. I want to talk a little bit about the responsibility of the employer, because a lot of times what I've been seeing is the employees kind of go to leadership and say, hey, leadership, we don't have anything like this in our workplace. We need a policy, a committee, a framework, something like that. And then the other side is leadership goes, hey, we need this, and layers it onto employees that maybe they're trying to figure out their place in it all. So
Mhm.
is there a better way out of those two ways? Do we need both ways? How do
Yeah.
they come together? Help me there.
That's a really amazing and very practical question, Sam. I'm actually really happy you asked that question. It's probably one of the questions I get asked the most. It's the how. How do you do this,
How.
right? How do you do this effectively? One of the most poignant challenges that I hear all the time is leaders, particularly leaders, executive directors of charities and nonprofits, being really scared to mobilize equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives. And they're usually scared for a few reasons. One, maybe they don't have any personal lived experience with any identities of oppression. They might not be racialized, they might not be queer, they might not live with a disability. So they're kind of like, oh, if I'm the one saying this, is this right? Should it be led by community, led by the folks who lived with this experience? So that's usually one big fear they have. Another great fear that comes up and that creates some hesitancy, of course, is not doing it the right way, right? So the idea that like, if I do it, but I don't really understand it well, is it gonna flop? Is it gonna make me look bad? Is it gonna make the organization look bad, and so forth? And usually what the result of that is yes, you're absolutely right. People tend to punt it to their employees or their volunteers and say, hey, like we really want to be super, inclusive here. Like we're going to start a committee. It's all volunteer led or it's all employee led. And the problem with that is that you're absolutely right. Employees might be kind of like, is this just extra work, right? Like, is this just like stuff that's being piled on me? That's one angle. The other angle that comes up quite frequently is that things don't actually get mobilized effectively because the people in power are separate from the people mobilizing change. And you actually need both, right? You are always going to need power to mobilize change. That's how change works. From the civil rights movement to the women's rights movement to the changes that we do in our individual organizations, power is critical. Anyone who's worked with a board knows this, right? Your staff might be like, we want to do this thing. The executive director might be like, we want to do this thing. But if the board runs the money and the board says you're not doing the thing, it doesn't matter, right? You need power to mobilize change. So having your employees or your volunteers be the only ones that are looking to mobilize anything, whether it's equity, diversity, inclusion related, or another project or program, and leaving it isolated there, puts them at a disadvantage because no matter what they come up with, they now need to ask, right? And they need to see, and then that could be completely shut down. And then you end up with this stalemate going back and forth. Yeah. Simultaneously, if the people in power are the only ones coming up with those decisions, it can kind of come across infantilizing for the staff and the volunteers. Kind of like mommy and daddy are telling you to do this thing, right? And it can actually create senses of resentment, feelings of inadequacy. So it can be really complicated. When I usually work with organizations, I recommend two things. I recommend, regardless of what project you're doing in the equity, diversity, inclusion space or in any space, you need to resource it accordingly. If as an organization you decide we are absolutely going to increase the diversity of our volunteers, you need to put the time, the resources, and the money behind that. You need to say, we are going to do it. Here is the budget. Not we will figure out the budget in 6 months. It is, here is the budget now. Here are the resources now. That's really critical. And then the second piece of that is inviting people into the process. As a leader, you need to at times make the declaration. You need to make the stance that this is something that the organization will be pursuing moving forward. But it's a difference in terms of asking people to be a part of that journey with you and telling them to be a part of that journey with you. People who are really passionate about this will self-select. Picking your one Black employee and say, you have to run Black History Month, that's not going to go very well. Yeah. If you invite the folks on your team and say, hey, we have a budget put aside. It's really important that we emphasize the importance of Black history, specifically in Canada, because Canadian Black history isn't taught. I'm saying as a leader, this is something we need to do. and I'm giving the budget for it, who wants to be a part of that? Completely different conversation, completely different experience, and folks will want to self-select into that journey.
I think it's like anything. I mean, it's the sustainability, right? It's one thing if you're providing 1 year of funding and you think that that's enough and you've checked a box, then I think they're doing it wrong. But help me out. Are they doing it wrong?
I mean, it's really funny that you mentioned that, the whole of 1 year of funding and checking a box, because it's only with equity, diversity, inclusion, or things that organizations see as not important or not core to the mission of the organization, that gets that 1 year funding, right? If I were to say the HR department of your company only gets 1 year of funding, people would be like, that makes no sense. What do you mean, right? Or the core programming of your organization only gets 1 year of funding. You'd be like, well, it's the core program. We need that program every single year. I want folks to really think of equity, diversity, inclusion as an extension of the core functions of your organization. It is not a separate piece. It is not, there's an EDI person over there that does EDI things, and that's their job, and that's it. It's this person. You might have a role or a board member or a staff member whose job it is to challenge you and implement those programs moving forward. But your job as an organization is to make their function a core part of your culture. Right. Every single decision you make has to have that lens be a part of it. So it's not something that becomes a push to the wayside. It actually becomes a core part of why you do what you do.
Beautifully said. We have a couple of questions. I'm going to take this one. I believe this one is from Agnes. So Dwaine, I'm going to ask this. How do we shape EDI policies around things that we don't have control over? The example being used is time availability.
Yeah, that's a really great question, Agnes. Thanks for sharing that. And I think this question is related to the example I gave of Mira, being someone who is incredibly qualified to support youth refugees experiencing mental health, being a refugee herself, but someone who doesn't have the time to do after-school programming. Your organization runs after-school programming. There's a few pieces there. I think one of the first pieces is you as an organization, you absolutely can't cater to every single person's needs, right? You can't say, well, we really want Mira, so we're going to completely change how we run our organization. That obviously is not going to make any sense. However, there's a ton of creative ways that organizations can leverage things and opportunities for folks that often aren't leveraged. So in this example of a youth mental health charity that I use, yes, the programming is delivered for youth after school, right? And so of course, a person like Mira who can't do after school work isn't going to be able to attend the program. But she's also a former refugee and someone who is qualified in mental health stuff as well. Is there another capacity that you could leverage her volunteer expertise? Could she review your programming, right? Could she meet with your staff? Could she be a board member? Like, what are the other avenues that you can leverage that level of expertise? I think that's often one of the biggest challenges with the social sector, especially charities and nonprofits, is we get so caught up in the work that we're doing in the moment because everything is so much work, right? Like there's so much to do. There's not enough time. There's not enough resources. So anything that seems like it's changing the status quo can be like, we just can't do it, right? There's no capacity or energy or time for it. But that sometimes limits our ability to actually leverage some really phenomenal resources. So if I were running that youth mental health charity and I saw someone like Amira, and Amira was interested and excited to support but couldn't, just do the after school programs, I would say, well, you're a former refugee. Like, you actually could probably give us some really good advice or guidance on the resources that we recommend for families, or talk about, maybe there's a session that we can do, a special session where you talk about your experience transitioning into the community. It doesn't have to be a traditional program time. There's creative ways that you can implement stuff like that. So that's really important.
Brilliant. And we had a question earlier, it really ties into what we just spoke about. This comes from Amber. How do we recruit volunteers with our narrow frameworks? The example given is similar. Volunteer roles are mostly weekdays, 9 to 5. We don't have transit access. So we typically get retired folks in the immediate neighborhood who happen to be white and middle to upper class. So very similar question. Yeah.
That's a really great question,
Yeah.
Amber. Thank you for sharing that as well. This is actually something I worked with an organization in Ottawa on very recently. You have to identify what are the equity barriers and what are the core functions of your organization. If your organization only operates from 9 to 5, and those are the only times when you can leverage volunteers, maybe there isn't a creative avenue like we just spoke about with the Mira scenario. There just isn't one, right? There's like, you've thought about it, you've gone through the mechanisms, you only utilize volunteers 9 to 5. That's okay. Maybe you're only going to get volunteers from 9 to 5, and that means that there will be a subsection of folks that are eliminated. Folks who work a traditional 9 to 5, who have other responsibilities during the day, won't be able to participate. However, there's another equity barrier here that was brought up, which is fascinating, is transit access, right? The idea that like you could have other folks participate if they had access to transit, right? Or if they had access to transportation. And that's really critical. As an organization, I think that is a priority that you would need to serve internally and say, is this something that we have a responsibility to provide, right? This goes a little bit broader into these concepts of volunteer compensation. There's a sort of shifting political theory on volunteerism. Historically, volunteerism has always been seen as altruistic only. You have to give all your time and your resources, your energy and your money, and get nothing in return. And really, over the past 20 years, with folks like Volunteer Canada and others leading the way, we've shifted that narrative to say, no, it's an exchange, right? Volunteers are loaning their time, but they do need something back in exchange. It might not be a check, right? It might not be an hourly wage, but it might be a letter of recommendation. It might be, time to connect with others. Maybe they're looking for social connection. Maybe volunteers are looking for something. People don't volunteer simply for altruistic reasons. There's an exchange to a degree. One of those exchanges could be a transit pass. And I've actually seen this done with organizations. I've seen organizations say, if you volunteer with us this many shifts per week, we will actually provide you a transit pass, right? And they build that into their budget. And it's a recognition of, it's hard for folks to get to our location. They can't actually access the transit. So we're not going to be able to get, again, diverse volunteers. Also, it's a mechanism for recruitment, right? Especially when you think about folks from marginalized communities. Youth volunteers is a great example of that. When you look at youth who a transit pass for them, if they don't have a license, is like freedom, right? They can go anywhere they want. They can do what they need to do. And if you're able to say within your budget, okay, we can allocate a transit pass or 2 or 3 or 4, whatever it might be, for the youth, then that might be a unique opportunity to say, hey, if you give us this many shifts, you get this thing in exchange. Now, of course, if those systems don't exist, right? You don't have access to transit whatsoever. There's no sort of mechanisms for that. Then there's another conversation to be had, which is, are there other services or opportunities that you can provide? A great example of this is the Table Community Food Center. They're based in Perth, Ontario. They're one of the network of food centers or food banks in the Greater Ottawa Capital Region, and they're rural. So there's no Ottawa transportation in Perth. You have a car or a truck, and that's it. You don't have a car or truck, you can't get around. So the way that they mechanize their volunteering is they actually have like a bus system, which is really interesting. So they have like a van bus pickups, and they have a farm where they do planting, where they do like a community garden. They have their traditional food bank. They have a few different mechanisms. And they say, if you want to volunteer, but you don't have transit, we have arranged to have a bus pick folks up at this particular time, for these shifts, and you can volunteer on the farm for these days. So they've actually just looked at, for folks who don't have transit or transportation, they can volunteer here because we will like pick folks up at this location or in this area. We'll do like a kind of like the school buses used to do the rounds and pick folks up. We'll bring everyone to the farm. You will volunteer on the farm. We'll bring you back at this particular time. For folks who do have transportation, you have more options. You have more selection. You're able to volunteer here or there, at the food center or at the farm, and so forth. These sorts of mechanisms are the types of creativity that are like required sometimes to open up the doors to more diverse volunteer recruitment and retention. It might not be easy to think through at first, which is why the first thing to think about is, what is the barrier? Is the barrier transportation? Is the barrier something else? once you've identified the barrier, then it's easier to think through the solution. If you try to say we just need to recruit diverse volunteers, it feels too big. It doesn't feel
Yeah.
tangible enough.
Yeah. Like I feel like this could have been a half a day chat with you and I, easily. We only have a few minutes left, but one of the areas that I really wanted to take a deep dive into is the support programs for employees that you focused on as well. Do you want to share a little bit about that as we sort of close today?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest pieces in volunteer recruitment and retention, we spent a lot of time on the recruitment side today. Yes, spent a lot of time on like figure out the barriers that will, when you break down those barriers, folks, you'll be able to recruit them more effectively. And Sam, you're right, we could have talked about this for another 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours.
Yeah.
Retaining folks is so critical. Anyone who works in HR will tell you it's more expensive to lose someone than it is to hire them. And it's the same thing with volunteers. And unfortunately, we've seen a decline in volunteering across Canada over the past 10 years. There's some pretty phenomenal stats out of Stats Canada and Volunteer Canada that show that volunteer engagement has declined anywhere between 20 and 60% in some parts of the country. A part of that is aging, right? A lot of the volunteers are frankly getting a little older. A lot of them are retirees and unable to volunteer at the capacity. And organizations haven't figured out how to recruit and engage younger volunteers. One of the best ways to keep folks engaged is employee resource or employee affinity groups, or in this case, volunteer resource or volunteer affinity groups. Yes, people are coming to volunteer or participate with your organization for a particular purpose. Maybe they need their 40 hours for high school, right? Maybe that's an Ontario thing. If you're not from Ontario, that's an Ontario thing. Maybe they are really passionate about the issue or the topic. Maybe they're their parent or cousin or a friend or someone has been impacted by the service that you provide. Everyone will have their own individual reasons for volunteering, but in addition to that, when they are there, how they feel matters, and that's where the inclusion piece comes in. And the number one thing you can do is make sure your volunteers feel like isn't just a transaction. Yes, it might be transactional in the sense that they are volunteering and they're getting something in return, but they need to feel a deeper connection to your cause, to your purpose, to your organization. And a great way of doing that is just creating these affinity groups or these social groups for these folks. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. If you're a smaller organization and you don't have a massive volunteer contingent, I wouldn't recommend segmenting your volunteers into different cultural or ethnic groups or anything along those lines. I think just focusing more on positive reinforcement, culture building, having volunteers spend time with staff, build stronger relationships, those things are important. If you're a bigger organization though, and you're dealing with hundreds of volunteers from a bunch of different contingents, recognizing and acknowledging what are those sub-communities within your larger volunteer base that would actually appreciate some time together. And what does that look like? If you're, again, an organization that specializes in addiction support, you're going to have volunteers who've struggled with addiction and those who haven't, right? So maybe creating a space for those who've struggled with addiction and are current volunteers to come together and talk about their experiences together. That is a super high value experience for those folks, right? They're now maintaining and gaining community the same way that the folks you're serving are maintaining and gaining community. So adding that layer, that's almost like 2.0 or 3.0, but that layer of going from not just the policy resulting in diversity, but also going one step further into how do we deepen that community connection, that sense of inclusion and belonging is the sort of next step in that process.
Yeah, brilliant. As I said earlier, I could chat with you all day long. I could listen to you all day long. Thank you so much, Dwaine. I really appreciate it. Like how I'm feeling right now, I know how to stay in touch with you, but I want to make sure everyone on the call does. How are we finding you at NewPact if we want to engage and connect with you further?
That's a great question. Let me go ahead and put this up on the screen for you folks. So you can actually reach me at Dwaine@newpact.co. I'm just going to open up the NewPact website and you can go ahead and take a peek at that. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn or anything along those lines. You can find me just by my name. My team, all the information about NewPact and the supports we provide are all listed here on our website. You can reach us using the contact page or just any of our names at newpact.co. I'm one of a few folks at NewPact, which is pretty phenomenal. We have about 8 different facilitators right now covering a range of topics, and we all cover different things. So I'm equity, diversity, inclusion, but my colleague Tanya covers social impact measurement. So if you're really focusing on measuring the impact of your program, she covers that. My colleague Kelsey covers communications. So that's also really great. If you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out.
Great. And Hannah's reminding us, Hannah from CBI is reminding all of us that all attendees today will receive contact information and some great resources. Dwaine, thank you from the bottom of my heart for spending time with me today.
Thank you for spending some more time with me today, Sam. Always a pleasure. Our
love
chats,
it.
you're right, they go by so quick. An hour
They
is
go
so
by
fast.
too fast.
Okay.
It's always an honor to spend time with all of you. Thank you so much for joining. We know you were coming to us from across the country, and of course to all of those great questions, because I love when we hear your questions. They always are the best ones in the whole hour. So thank you so much. I'm Sam Laprade. Until next time, we're going to be connecting on February the 18th. Watch social media, watch that inbox for all that great information, and we'll see you next month, everyone. Take care.
Bye, folks.